Okay, greetings everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. Gotta check my channels here. Make sure everything's good. And while we're doing that, I want to thank everybody for supporting me, and make sure to hit that like, share, and subscribe button no matter what channel you're on, whether it be Keith Little, El Perro, or Hecklebus. And of course, get over to those other channels and hit those subscribe and notification buttons. And there's, of course, is PayPal links down in the details section for anybody that wants to share some love. Always appreciated. Every little bit, 10, 15, 20 bucks. Every little bit counts. And hopefully one day that won't be needed. I'll be able to express fully the process that I'm going through so that people can start executing their own credit devices in the proper manner. And while we're on it, I want to thank Norman Longstaff. The StreamYard link is pinned for anybody that wants to join the panel. And Norman Longstaff is one of the fellows up in Canada that's following along, been doing his own actions in regards to the paperwork as it's construed to the Canadian law in concurrence with United States law, as I expressed. So he's one that's been doing his due diligence to research to see the differences and the variances so he can apply the same principles of asserting that credit device as coming from him. And he's been doing that on his phone bill. I believe he's getting ready to exert it in various other venues as well. But his cell phone bill, he's been paying for several months through the detachment coupon and making a directive, I believe. Very well understood man, and is taking action on that. And that's the support that I appreciate. So when I talk about appreciating my followers here, and I don't care about the numbers, it's because there are very few chosen. And in that very few chosen, I appreciate the very few that do show up for these panels to take heed and listen and do their research. The appreciation in a fewer number of people would reasonably and logically be a greater appreciation than one dispersed through millions of people. So I sincerely do appreciate all of your support, every last one of you. And with that, we're going to get going. As we know, we've been talking about Hitler's willing executioners. And as I've expressed, even in these modern times, even though Hitler's no longer around, it's the same premise that Jesus is no longer around either. So we have simple ideologies that we believe in because of the actions of people in the past. And today, the spiritual value of knowing that Jesus Christ is the Redeemer, and that puts you in the position of being a Redeemer yourself, the one that gives credit to bring your waxen and poor brothers out of debt, is missing. Everybody's following and placating to general society values in various different venues, whether it be educational, health, employment, whatever, politics, religion. And those are different value systems that are all taking your value that you put into them as it's a valid value system, and you are placing a value in a system that has no intrinsic value to begin with. So it takes the extrinsic value of somebody else to put the value into that system. And then that very system takes that value as if though it's got a valid authority in saying what your value truly is and calling you a debtor. I don't see why other people don't see this. So we're going to continue on. And I do have one last little quote that I highlighted from our reading from last night that I want to finish up in regards to that very first section before we get into highlighted sections through the rest of the book, which we're just going to skim through here. We spent a week just on the very first few pages of the book, and we have the rest of them to go. So we're going to skim through the rest of them just to give you that basic ideology of why I call people Hitler's willing executioners. Even though Hitler's gone, we still have people that are willing to execute other people under that same ideology of giving value to various different venues in a system that placates now you have no authority and that you have to do what they say. I don't know where people get this wrong. So it says, even with these qualifications, this approach must be broadened beyond being an objective categorization of actions to include an investigation of motives of those Germans performing acts in a given category, in a given venue, jurisdiction, particularly among the order followers. Everybody, you hear it all the time, I'm just doing my job. Those are order followers. Where is the order? Is it really an order? Did it come from above? Or is it coming from yourself, giving validity in a value system that isn't recognizing your order, your place in that order as being first? Because without you, that system has no intrinsic value. It's all invention, fabrication, and fiction. No matter what category of actions a person's acts are properly classified as, is still important. They have to have that intrinsic or that extrinsic value to show that their system has some sort of validity. It still has no value intrinsically, none. It's just like a Federal Reserve note. It's all paperwork and documentation that doesn't have you in it. It's a big invention, fabrication, and fiction system, and you're not part of it. The person's attitude towards his acts, I'm just doing my job, shows that his attitude isn't spiritual at all. I'm just doing my job. I'm not putting any spiritual value into it. You have to realize I'm just doing my job is their willingness to execute you because somebody else told them to. And his motivation to undertake it is still important, for it renders the act itself one thing or another. So your actions are either spiritual or manual. In the manual presentation of that value, whatever value you're putting into it, if you're putting it into a manual system, it has to come from your spirit. And this is what should be telling you whether your spirit is acting right or wrong. Because if you're doing the same thing to other people that you would abhor that they do to you, and you're using the excuse that I'm just doing my job, I believe, and in my strong opinion, you're just a bitch-ass slave. And I will call you Hitler's willing executioners right to your face. I will call you the bastards that I truly see you for. As you placate to be a spiritual being and you're just doing it for the good of community because you're just doing your job where you have no spiritual credence yourself. Whatever the cognitive and value structures of the individual may be, changing the incentive structure in which they operate might, and in many cases will certainly induce them to alter their actions as they calculate the desired course of action in light of what they know and value, and the possibilities of realizing them in different mixes, in different venues. This, it must be emphasized, does not mean that the incentive structure itself is causing people to act, but only that in the conjunction with the cognitive and value structures are together producing the action. So in other words, your ability to be able to observe the rest of the world cognitively and put your own value into it is actually what's going to produce your desired effects. And if you're placing your value in another man, and the scripture says not to do that, it's because you're putting your value into another man that you've displaced your own value. Whereas if you keep your value and you share it with another man, therefore, if your cup is overwhelming, it fills their cup and brings them up. That's the principle of prosperity and abundance in profiting the word of truth. So when you bring truth to the table before a contract, you're filling cups to the fulfillment before it's effectuated. So instead of bringing people that are slaves to the table that have no fulfillment and therefore can only do what is ordered, the cup that's overwhelming, the one that's supposed to be doing the ordering, is keeping all that to themselves and taking advantage and profit off the loss of another man. Pure and simple. And I don't care if you're doing it through the paperwork or through your verbal order telling somebody to do something. I'm just doing my job and you have to do this. No, I don't. Just because you're doing your job doesn't mean your job applies to me. That job, you'll see, is a manual instruction. And you've forgotten your spiritual instruction, wherein God sanctified you and ordained you a prophet unto the nations. And you're trying to make a prophet unto yourself so you can go home and support your wife and children by taking the profit of another man. That's inherently wrong. And everybody should know this in their heart. So, number one, part one, section one of this book, Recasting the View of Anti-Semitism, a framework for analysis. And the part I highlighted here was Germans were more or less like us, or rather similar to how we represent ourselves to be. So the people back then are us today, and us today, are them back then. Why? Because people refuse to change and they're falling to the same mechanisms of placing a value into a fictional system and now believing that system has some kind of authority over them because they're willing to take upon a convenience that says, okay, well, you can do this, but you're not going to do this. Because if you do this, we're going to slap you, we're going to cut you, we're going to fuck you, we're going to enslave you. No, you've already been fucked. You've already been cut off from the spiritual presence. You're already been enslaved. Rational, sober children of the Enlightenment who are not governed by magical thinking. Yet here you are using that same excuse. I'm just doing my job. How long and how many times are you going to hear that? How many times are you going to watch them come get your neighbors until you finally realize that knock on the door with all them lights and sirens right out front is coming for you? And you still don't know what you're doing wrong. But rooted in objective reality. In other words, you're not using your own observances subjectively to yourself. Again, you're giving up all of your manual or spiritual value, your spiritual credence to the manual existence of that magical thinking of everybody else's objective views. That's that democracy. But I remind you people that democracy is a cutting edge. It's Occam's razor, because as soon as it becomes 50-50, now we have a conundrum. As soon as it becomes 50-50, the scales are balanced. But the problem with that is now that the scales are balanced, now people have to realize there's both positive and negative, and both sides have to agree to that. Why can't you just bring that into balance with your one vote, your one parlay? And in putting that one vote, rather than putting it in yourself as if though you're some ego narcissistic Dunning-Kruger who knows it all, put your value in your parlay and your vote in Jesus Christ as the Redeemer, and be the very Redeemer that you're supposed to be. They, like us, were economic men who admittedly sometimes could be moved by irrational motives, by hatreds produced by economic frustrations, or by some of the enduring human vices like the lust for power or pride. And that's why I said I don't give a fuck about the numbers. Matter of fact, these low numbers tells me I'm probably following a more true path, for very few are chosen. So I appreciate everybody here. Producer Moose, greetings. Paul C. Baum, greetings. I appreciate all your comments. Norman Longstaff, everybody, please hit the like, share, and subscribe button. Get this information out. And remember, it's not about the numbers. It's about the message. It's not about me. It's about the message. It's not about you. It's about the message. That's the true value, and it needs to be shared with everybody. And when that value is shared with everybody, those that return it will be the ones in the few. But these are all understandable as common sources of irrationality. They seem commonsensical to us. In other words, most of us believe that because objectively so many other people believe that you should jump off the bridge, that it seems commonsensical we should jump off the bridge too. It's irrational. We know it. But because so many others believe it and actually do it, no matter what's in our heart, we placate, okay, well, we better go get that SS5 filled out. We better go get a driver's license. We better get this, quote, higher education. We better take upon the benefit of the government of protecting us on our own homeland, even though we've never had a war here except our own war called the Civil War, where we fought amongst ourselves. Do you see where it's going? Do you see another civil war coming? Do you see how placating that the freedom of transit is guaranteed throughout the entire territory of the Union, as all of these nations violate that very first article of their very own constitution by limiting the movement of people in other nations, by going into that nation, ingressing into that nation with their manipulative manual Congress, is in fact a very violation of their very own first article. Freedom of transit is guaranteed throughout all territories of the Union, and each one of those nations has a post. How many of them have a diplomatic post? How many of them have a diplomatic post proclaimed as an embassy? Embassy. Think about the terms and conditions of the words that they're using. So let's look at the next one. Although most societies throughout history have been governed by absurd beliefs at the center of their cosmological and ontological notions of life. Ontology, the throat, the ears, the conduct, the airways, notions, notes, promises, their vocal promises, as they reiterate their very own manual promises without the spiritual promise, the immutable promise to seek counsel in Him. And that was the original promise. Why are people forgetting about that promise? Which their members have held axiomatically the starting point for the study of Germany during the Nazi period, has generally ruled out the possibility that such a state of affairs then prevailed. So when we go back to the eons of time and we see this absurdity in the languages, even in the hieroglyphs and all of it, even in the caveman paintings, the absurdity is that we think we comprehend that. Objectively, according to what everybody else has told us about that. Have you ever gone to a cave and looked at those cave paintings? Have you ever gone to Egypt and looked at the hieroglyphs? Have you ever contemplated them yourself to imagine that they might possibly mean something else? Have you done this with the English language to go back further to find out that they might possibly mean something else? More specifically, the assumptions preponderate first that most Germans could not have shared Hitler's general characterization of Jews, presented in Mein Kampf and elsewhere, as being a devilishly cunning, parasitic, malevolent race, which had harmed the German people greatly. And second, that most Germans could not possibly have been so anti-Semitic as to countenance the Jews' mass extermination. In other words, it wasn't in the hearts of Jews before Hitler and the rise of the Nazi German party that the Jews were the problem. It wasn't until that party came about and started placating their notion that the Jews were the problem, that then the German Christians who came after the Jews said, well, our predecessors are the problem. You see where that goes? See, that's the egotistical thinking of a German Nazi party, thinking that the people that made them have no authority, that somehow they have authority magically. Greetings, Matthew, son of Thomas. How's it going, brother?
It's been a long last couple of weeks, I'll tell you, but love your show.
Awesome. Thank you. All glory goes to him.
Yeah, so you were talking about the Jews. So Genesis 3 talks about the enmity between the serpent seed and the seed of Adam and Eve, right? Synagogue of Satan. So we know who they are. So there's 12 tribes of Judah, right? Or no, 12 tribes of Israel, and Judah is our brother, yet they claim to be our brother Judah, but they're not because of what they are doing, and we know what you're talking about. These are the synagogue of Satan.
Well, yeah, and it goes back to Hebrews 6:17, where if you accept the immutable promise of his oath, then you need no other oath, not even of brotherhood. So when your brotherhood falls by the wayside of another oath, it's not you that's been placated as the false, but them. It's their actions that show that they're the false ones. And if you don't have that immutable promise of the oath already in you, you won't see that because you too have fallen by that same wayside of accepting somebody else's oath. So it's a hard thing to see if you've been indoctrinated into this system to believe that the past is so terrible that we have to get out of it. Then maybe you're part of the problem. And that's the way the system works. Inherently, for the system to be able to fix problems, it's got to have problems. And so the best way to continue in that is to continue creating problems. And one of the biggest mass problems on this planet today is that birth registration. It's a eons old theory or concept that was started in Roman times when Jesus came about, which was the very first census. So I don't care what goes on between now and back then, but the connection is very, very much real. And if people don't know how to relate that through that enumeration at birth that creates the state's vital statistics jurisdiction through that Census Bureau, that's the very reason, or the very concept, I guess, of why Jesus came about at that time. It's a concordance of events. It's an order of events that happened in a natural state of being that's supposed to be there to help us see that objective view throughout history. The story of Jesus will never disappear. It's one of the most powerful stories if we can relate to it. It doesn't have to be true. It has to be relatable. And that's all. So I'm going to continue on. It says, because this is assumed, the burden of proof has been placed on the people who would assert the opposite. Why is this? Well, again, because they're placating that the previous history is no good. Can't you see its fallacy? And everybody pipes up and says, yeah, they did this wrong, and not a one of them pays attention to what is supposed to be done right. So we end up with a situation where we've got all kinds of people pointing fingers, but nobody coming forth with a solution, and yet not realizing that the solution's already there. What is done is what ought to be done. There is nothing new under the sun. It's been done already. All you have to do is follow that way. It's called a moral compass. Just do what's right. It's that simple. If you wouldn't want your neighbor to come out of his door one day dressed up in a military uniform and place a tax collector in front of your door and knock on your door and say, hey, you owe us taxes, then why would you get a job in any venue to do that very same thing? If you wouldn't want somebody to come knock on your door and say, hey, you have to educate your child in our public education system, we're going to take him for 8 hours a day and we'll return him safe and peaceful, but he's going to come back with some attitude and he's going to talk back to you and you're going to want to beat him, but we're going to tell you, no, you can't do that either. Who the fuck are these people? Where is this insane rationality coming from? Because it's not rational at all. So we really have to think about this. And I've got one very little thing that I've got highlighted next, and I'm going to end up on that. And then we'll discuss any more if you want to, Matthew. And anybody else that wants to hit the StreamYard link, come on up. Feel free. Which starting point is the appropriate one? The one that stands in stark contradiction to the record of public and private utterances and acts? Or the one in consonance with them? In other words, if you're going to placate that the history of mankind is in the Library of Congress and all of the records that you're reading, but you're dismissing the very scriptures that every nation is bound by, because all of their laws, their national laws, are subsequent to the spiritual nature of their people, then something is inherently missing, and that is the very original starting point. People are not going back to that starting point. This is why I have a problem with people that want to sit there and tout their Moorish nationality as if it's so high and mighty. I urge you to think again. Placating that you're a Moorish national, while at the same time trying to assert that you're a prophet unto the nations. You can't come forth as a nation and placate that you're unto the nations. You have to come from above a national standard for those manual existences and present yourself spiritually to give that national credence. Otherwise, they will see you as a debtor, equal station in life. Every nation is a debtor unto the lenders, unto the nations. Deuteronomy 15, the very first two verses talk about the Lord's release every 7 years. This is how they come up with their subsequent bankruptcy laws. In that very same chapter, 4 verses later, verse 6, it tells us we are the lenders unto those nations. We are not the ones that go through the bankruptcy. We are the ones that allow that manual existence to go through a recording, a remanifestation after being bankrupt for 7 years, and give them clearance on that bankruptcy and lend unto that nation again, saying, here, we're going to give you a fresh start. We're going to make all things new again. This is our power as a redeemer, and nobody wants to step up into that. The one that stands in stark contradiction to the record of public and private utterances and acts. Rule 803 of the Federal Rules of Evidence. Number 2, excited utterances. Number 16, ancient documents. The point of origin for such excited utterances, proclaiming public law 97-280 that the scriptures are the foundations of the law of the land, the supreme law of the land. The scriptures are the foundation of the supreme law of the land. So the law of the land is the foundation of the supreme law of the land. Do you see how that's backwards? See, what they did was they took the law of the land and they added unto it and called it the supreme law of the land. Whereas the law of the land, Leviticus, the first law, the land shall not be sold forever, for it is mine. So you and your supreme law of the land is a declination. It declines to accept the fact not only that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, but they shall make no law respecting the land. So they can only make a fictional overlay, and that is what's preventing you as a creature on the land of ascending through that overlay to the firmament, the mentality of being firm in your word. That's the firmament right there. It has nothing to do with the water here or the water down there. It has to do with the waters above and the waters below. The blood, that's water, okay? The water up here, the fluids that operate in your mind, in these crystal orifices, they have fluid and then they have solid crystals. They're both crystal forms. One's a fluid crystal, one's a liquid crystal, and one's a solid crystal. And they interact. The waters above and the waters below. This is your firmament when you're firm in mentality of knowing what is true, correct, and right, righteous. You placate to no fiction. So I've got a note. It says long-standing spirituality is evaporating before our very eyes. So again, we're looking at the eons in history wherein every nation recognizes that their foundational principle of the law is scriptural and spiritual. In fact, and again, I urge everybody to watch Frank versus God. Now, this was a movie that was scripted on the real life events of a senator from Nebraska who happened to be an atheist and used the very scriptures against the insurance companies for an act of God. Every breath you take is an act of God. Make sure it has an effect of God and not of the man. Because if you need a pen to write something down, remember the eye of a needle. It's very hard for a man to pass the eye of a needle, right? No. Everybody's had it backwards, and they've been passing that man through an eye of a needle all their fucking lives and don't realize it. You're going to be able to get that man back through that eye of the evil, or of the needle, not evil. You're going to be able to pull that ink back off that paper and put it back in that pen? No. You better learn how to coin your words or purse your lips. What do you got, Matthew? You there, Matthew? All right. Well, evidently he's off somewhere else, busy doing something else. Yes, Paul C. Baum. The Redeemer is represented by self. And again, the man is not the self. The man is the neighbor. The man is the next of kin to the self. And the self is a unity of the whole, because spiritually, we all have the same spiritual credence. We all come from the same source of life. and every breath we take is proof of that. So I want everybody to think about this. And again, I really appreciate everybody's support. Please be sure to hit that PayPal link to share some love there. Hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And remember, folks, if you're going to put yourself out there manually through the eye of a needle by scripting a pen in any form, in any venue, make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you learn how to ask questions. Make sure you learn how to read what's on that document. Make sure you understand how that document is formatted, where the squares are, what's within those squares, what counts as like kinds. Those forms will tell you if you learn how to read them. This is why I say get back to a concise English handbook, college composition handbook, and the King James Version of the Scriptures, 1611 print. Use that as your principal foundation of your spirit, and you will be able to defeat every law under the law of nations. Because again, you're a prophet unto those nations. And I know it sounds like a lot, and I'm going to assure you it is a lot. I've been doing this research solid for 7 years, over 20,000 hours, I assure you. But everything is uniform. It's uniform throughout all jurisdictions. And when you find the things that are accurate and you are able to assemble them in the various different venues throughout and show how they're uniform, and this is the same thing as this, and it's saying it in a different way, and this is the same thing as this, and it's saying it in a different way, then you can correlate that Article 1 of the Constitution of the Universal Postal Union that says freedom of transit is guaranteed throughout all territories of the Union, is correlative to Psalms 121, verse 8, wherein the Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. This is the ingress and egress as we move in and out, and we walk with him. This is the Congress. So this is our communication with Congress, and we simply have to agree. Okay, I agree. Yeah, that's right here in Psalms 121, verse 8. Why are we supposed to do this? Because we're communicators to the people of the world. Oh, that would be Jeremiah 1:5, where we were sanctified and ordained to be a prophet unto the nations. And those nations, they all have landmarks. So that land shall not be sold forever. And it's marked by the redeemers. Not the fictional overlay of those titles that are false bearings. Look at those titles. Do they have a document stamp on them? Probably not. You know, that certificate of live birth, that's a document. It was meant to transfer something, and therefore it was supposed to have a document, a transfer, capital transfer stamp on it, and it doesn't, proving that there was literally no transfer, and therefore all of the transactions based on that original transfer that never occurred are all not valid. None of them are valid because they have zero value in an asset anywhere. It was never documented properly, showing that there was an actual transfer of capital, meaning asset, in paperwork. And therefore, none of the transactions really have any value in them. So the importance is zero. It has zero importance. Think about that. And with that, I leave you, and I let everybody know, as always, I love you, but I don't give a fuck whether you love me back. Be blessed. Have a good night, and we'll see you next time. Bye.